The morning air inside the space station felt heavy with tension as Lee Taman walked through the metal corridors toward the main meeting room. His boots made soft sounds on the floor, while dozens of alien species moved around him, their strange voices mixing together like a chorus of different worlds. The Federation station orbiting Earth buzzed with activity because today was special. Today, the galaxy would learn about the Predator trial. Taman pushed his black hair away from his eyes and checked his datapad one more time. He was 28 years old and had spent most of his life studying creatures from different planets. His job as a xenobiologist meant he understood how alien animals lived, hunted, and survived. Most people thought his work was boring compared to the soldiers and pilots who got all the attention, but Taman loved every moment of discovering how life worked across the stars. The meeting room doors opened with a soft hiss, and Taman found his seat near the back. Around him sat representatives from 47 different species that belonged to the Galactic Federation. Humans had only joined 30 years ago, which made them the newest members. Most other species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before. Earth even learned how to leave their own solar system. Park Minji sat in the front row wearing her crisp blue Federation uniform. As the human diplomatic liaison, she handled all the important conversations between Earth and the other species. Her short hair was perfectly styled, and her face showed the serious expression she always wore during official meetings. Next to her sat Commander Kang Dawan, a tall man with gray hair who ran the human military forces. His thick arms were crossed, and his mouth was set in a hard line. Behind them, Dr. Shin Yeona adjusted her glasses and looked through her research notes. She was 75 years old and had taught Taman everything he knew about studying alien life forms. Her white hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her kind eyes held the wisdom of decades spent learning about the universe. The lights dimmed, and a massive holographic display appeared above the center of the room. The image showed a dark planet covered in swirling clouds. Strange structures rose from its surface like twisted mountains made of metal and stone. This was Kalros Prime, a world that existed only for one purpose. A tall figure stepped forward to address the gathering. Ambassador Thexvar belonged to a species called the Molari. His blue skin gleamed under the lights, and his four arms moved gracefully as he spoke. His voice came through the translation devices everyone wore in their ears. Fellow members of the Federation, Thexvar began, the time has come once again for the most ancient and sacred of our trials. Every 10 years, the Predator trial opens on Kalros Prime. For over 2,000 years, this challenge has tested the finest warriors from across our galaxy. The holographic display changed to show images of the previous trials. Massive creatures, with teeth like swords, chased competitors through dark forests. Flying beasts with wings that could slice through metal dove from cloudy skies, underground tunnels filled with things that glowed in the darkness and moved faster than the eye could follow. The trial consists of 7 zones, Thexvar continued. Each zone contains predators more dangerous than the last. No weapons are allowed. No tools may be brought from outside. Competitors must survive using only their natural abilities and whatever they can find or make in each environment. Taman leaned forward in his seat. He had read about the Predator trial in old Federation records. Every species that tried to complete it had failed. Some competitors died in the first zone. Others made it halfway through before the creatures overwhelmed them. The furthest anyone had ever gotten was the 6th zone, and that was over 300 years ago. The winner of the Predator trial gains their species significant advantages, the ambassador explained. First choice of new colony worlds. Increased resource allocations, a permanent seat on the High Council, but most important of all, the respect that comes with being the first to complete this ancient challenge. Commander Dawan shifted in his seat and whispered something to Minji. Taman could not hear the words, but he could see the worried expression on the commander's face. Dawan believed in human strength and military training, but even he knew the Predator trial was different from regular warfare. The display showed statistics from previous trials. The average survival time was 6 hours. Most competitors never made it past the 3rd zone. The creatures of Kalros Prime had been specially chosen and enhanced over thousands of years to create the perfect hunting environment. They were not just dangerous. They were designed to kill. Each species may send one representative, Thexvar announced. The trial begins in 30 standard days. Registration closes in 7 days. Choose your champions wisely. The meeting broke up into smaller groups as different species began discussing their options. The Vextar delegation huddled around their crystalline leader, their diamond-hard bodies catching the light like living gems. The Relkani hunters stood in a circle, their 6 arms moving in complex patterns as they communicated through gesture. The massive Gorvak warriors needed no discussion. They always sent their strongest fighter. Taman watched it all with fascination. Each species approached the problem differently, but they all had the same basic idea. Send the biggest, strongest, fastest warrior they could find. Load them up with genetic enhancements and combat training. Teach them to fight like the ultimate predator. It won't work, Taman said quietly to himself. Dr. Yona heard him speak and turned around. What won't work, my dear student? There. Approach. Fighting the predators head-on. If that worked, someone would have completed the trial by now. After 2,000 years and thousands of attempts, maybe the answer isn't about being the strongest. Yeona raised her eyebrows. Then what do you think the answer is? Taman stared at the holographic images still floating in the air. He saw creatures with evolved hunting techniques that had been perfected over millions of years. He saw environments where every element worked together in a complex web of survival. Most importantly, he saw patterns that others missed because they were too focused on the fighting. Understanding, he said. Not fighting them, but understanding them. Learning how they hunt, what they eat, where they go. Every creature has weaknesses and patterns. Even the most dangerous predator follows rules of biology and behavior. Commander Dowan had finished his conversation with Minji and overheard Taman's words. He turned around with a look of disbelief. Son, this isn't a nature documentary. Those things are designed to kill. You can't study your way past a creature that wants to eat you. But maybe you can, Taman replied. Every predator-prey relationship in nature has balance. The predators can't kill everything or they would run out of food. There must be ways for other creatures to survive in those environments, or the whole ecosystem would collapse. Minji joined the conversation with concern in her voice. Taman, I admire your scientific curiosity, but the predator trial is not a research expedition. Humans need to send our best trained soldier, someone with cybernetic enhancements and years of combat experience. Have any of those soldiers completed the trial? Taman asked. The question hung in the air because everyone knew the answer. No enhanced warriors had succeeded. No perfect soldiers had survived. No ultimate fighters had won. The Predator trial remained unbeaten after 2 millennia of attempts. Taman stood up from his chair and looked directly at the 3 most important humans in the Federation. I want to volunteer. The silence that followed was so complete that Taman could hear the humming of the station's life support systems. Commander Dowan's mouth fell open. Minji blinked rapidly as if she had not heard correctly. Even Dr. Yona looked surprised. Absolutely not, Dowan said firmly. Taman, you're a scientist. You study creatures through computer screens and laboratory equipment. You've never been in real combat. You don't have any genetic modifications or cybernetic implants. It would be suicide. Maybe that's exactly why it might work, Taman replied calmly. Every competitor so far has approached this the same way. They all tried to outfight, outmuscle, or out-technology the predators. What if the solution requires a completely different approach? Minji shook her head. The Federation laws require that any member species can volunteer a representative, but Taman, please think about this carefully. If you fail, it reflects on all of humanity. We're still the newest members of the Federation. Many species already doubt our capabilities. And if I succeed, Dr. Yona stepped closer to her former student. Taman, I taught you to think scientifically about every problem. Apply that same thinking to this decision. What evidence do you have that your approach would work when thousands of others have failed? Taman pulled out his datapad and showed them files he had been studying. I've analyzed every piece of footage from previous trials. The competitors who lasted longest weren't necessarily the strongest ones. They were the ones who adapted their tactics based on what they observed. But none of them approached it as an ecological puzzle instead of a combat challenge. He swiped through images of the different zones. Look at Zone 3, the thermal vents. Competitors always try to fight the heat-seeking worms or run past them quickly. But notice the mineral formations around the successful paths? The transport ship carrying Taman to Kelros Prime shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the small window next to his seat, he could see the fortress world floating in the darkness like a massive eye watching the stars. The planet's surface was hidden beneath thick clouds that swirled in patterns that seemed almost alive. Above it, the orbital station stretched for kilometers in every direction, a metal city hanging in space. Taman adjusted his simple gray uniform and checked his bag one more time. Unlike the other competitors, he carried no weapons or armor. His bag contained only research equipment, cameras, sensors, and data recording devices. Most importantly, he had spent the last month studying every piece of footage from previous trials until he could recite the hunting patterns of dozens of different predators. The docking bay was enormous, designed to hold ships from species of all different sizes. As Taman walked down the ramp from his transport, he saw vessels that looked like living creatures next to others that appeared to be made of pure energy. The air tasted metallic and recycled, but underneath that, he could smell something else, the scent of dozens of different alien atmospheres mixing together. A tall figure approached him as he reached the main floor. The being had 4 legs like a horse, but the upper body of a humanoid, covered in silver fur that reflected the station lights. This was a centauri, one of the older species in the Federation. "Lee Taman of Earth?" the creature asked through a translation device on its chest. "Yes, that's me. I am Station Coordinator Velthana. I will show you to the competitor quarters. I must warn you, human, that many of the other participants have expressed confusion about your selection." As they walked through the corridors, Taman could see what Velthana meant. Other competitors moved through the station like walking weapons. A massive Gorvak warrior stood 3 meters tall with arms like tree trunks and skin that looked like it could stop bullets. Its red eyes tracked Taman's movement with predatory interest. Near a viewing port, 3 Vextar representatives huddled together. Their crystalline bodies caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. One of them, slightly larger than the others, noticed Taman watching and approached with movements that sounded like glass chimes. "You are the human representative?" the creature asked. Its voice came from vibrations in its crystal structure that the translator turned into words. "I am Ambassador Veltaran of the Vextar Collective. We have studied your species' military records. Your selection is unexpected." Taman could hear the dismissal in the alien's tone, even through the mechanical translation. Sometimes unexpected approaches work better than traditional ones. Veltaran's crystal body flickered with colors that Taman's research told him indicated amusement. "Human, the Predator trial has claimed the lives of the greatest warriors in galactic history. Relkani huntmasters who can track prey across entire star systems. Gorvak berserkers who have never lost a battle. Enhanced soldiers with reflexes faster than your species can even perceive. What makes you think your unexpected approach will succeed where they have failed?" "Maybe because none of those approaches worked," Taman replied calmly. "After 2,000 years, perhaps it's time to try something completely different." The Vextar's body flashed bright red, which Taman knew was their equivalent of laughter. "We shall see, little human. The crystals of Kelros Prime will add your bones to their collection alongside all the others." As Veltaran moved away, another competitor approached. This one was clearly Relkani, tall and thin with 6 arms that moved independently of each other. Its skin was dark green with patterns that shifted and changed as Taman watched. The creature's large eyes had no pupils, just swirling colors that seemed to look directly into his soul. "I am Huntmaster Growl," the being said. Its voice was like wind through leaves. "I have trained for this trial for 37 of your Earth years. I can see heat signatures from 5 kilometers away. I can track a creature's path 3 days after it has passed. I can remain motionless for weeks while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What abilities do you bring to this challenge? Human?" Taman thought carefully about his answer. "I can watch and learn. I can see patterns that others miss because they're focused on hunting instead of understanding." Graal's 6 arms moved in complex patterns that Taman recognized as Relkani, sign language expressing confusion. The predators of Kael'ros Prime do not care about your understanding. They only care about killing. How will your observations help when a shadow claw is tearing your throat out? I guess I'll find out. The Relkani studied Taman for a long moment, then made a gesture that the translator identified as respectful dismissal. You are either very brave or very foolish, human. Perhaps both. I will remember your name when I complete the trial. Velthana led Taman through more corridors, until they reached the competitor quarters. The room was simple but comfortable, with a bed, desk, and computer terminal. Through the window, Taman could see Kael'ros Prime rotating slowly below them. Sometimes the clouds would part just enough to show glimpses of the surface, dark forests, metallic structures, and strange lights that moved in ways that suggested they were alive. You have 3 days before the trial begins, Velthana explained. During this time, you may study whatever records you wish and prepare however you see fit. You may also meet with the other 46 competitors, though I suspect many will not wish to waste time speaking with you. After the Centauri left, Taman sat at his desk and activated the computer terminal. The Federation database contained detailed information about every previous trial, including biometric data from the competitors, heart rates, stress levels, movement patterns, decision points. Everything was recorded and analyzed. He began with the most recent trial from 10 years ago. 23 competitors had entered the first zone. Within 4 hours, only 8 remained. Taman watched their final moments and noticed something interesting. The competitors who died weren't necessarily the weakest ones. They were the ones who made aggressive moves at the wrong times. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to his quarters. Taman opened the door to find Park Minji standing in the corridor. She wore casual clothes instead of her usual uniform, and her face showed worry lines that hadn't been there when he left Earth. Permission to enter? She asked formally. Of course. You don't need to ask permission, Minji. She stepped inside and looked around the simple room. I wanted to check on you before the trial begins. Also, I brought a message from Dr. Yona. Minji handed him a small data crystal. She said you would understand what it contains. Taman inserted the crystal into his computer. Dr. Yona's voice filled the room as a video message began playing. The elderly scientist sat in her laboratory on Earth, surrounded by specimens from dozens of different worlds. My dear student, she said, by the time you see this message, you will be on Kael'ros Prime preparing for the greatest challenge of your life. I want you to remember everything we discussed about predator-prey relationships. Every ecosystem has balance, even the most dangerous ones. Trust your observations, trust your training, and most importantly, trust yourself. The message continued, with specific advice about reading environmental cues and recognizing behavioral patterns in alien species. Dr. Yona had spent weeks preparing this information, knowing that Taman would have no outside assistance once the trial began. When the message ended, Minji sat on the edge of the bed. Taman, I have to ask you one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this? Even Commander Doan is having second thoughts, and you know how stubborn he can be. I'm certain, Taman replied. I've analyzed every second of footage from the ER. Last 50 trials. I've studied the behavioral patterns of over 200 different predator species. I've memorized the geographical features of all 7 zones. I'm as prepared as I can possibly be. But prepared for what? You're not going into a laboratory. You're going into an environment designed to kill you in the most efficient way possible. Taman pulled up a holographic display showing the first zone of the trial. The acid marshlands appeared above his desk in perfect detail, complete with carnivorous plants and toxic water. Look at this, he said, pointing to specific areas. Everyone focuses on the obvious dangers, the plants that shoot acid, the creatures that hunt in packs. But notice these small paths between the toxic pools? They're not random. Something created them, and whatever created them has to travel these routes regularly. Minji studied the display. You think there are safe creatures living in there? I think there has to be a complete ecosystem. The predators need food sources other than trial competitors. Those food sources need ways to survive and reproduce. Every death trap has to have gaps, or the whole system would collapse. And you're betting your life that you can find those gaps? I'm betting my life that 2,000 years of warriors couldn't see the forest for the trees. They were all looking for things to fight. I'm looking for ways to avoid fighting altogether. Minji was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, Calros Prime continued its slow rotation, revealing new glimpses of the surface with each turn. Strange aurora lights danced in the upper atmosphere, created by the planet's artificial magnetic field generators. The transport ship descended through the thick clouds surrounding Calros Prime as dawn broke over the planet's surface. Taman pressed his face against the small window and got his first real look at the world that had claimed thousands of lives over the past 2,000 years. The landscape below looked like something from a nightmare. Twisted metal structures rose from dark forests, while pools of liquid that might have been acid or molten metal reflected the pale sunlight. 47 competitors sat in silence during the descent. The tension in the air was so thick it seemed hard to breathe. Some of the warriors meditated or performed final weapon checks. Others stared straight ahead with the blank expressions of soldiers preparing for battle. A few, like the Vextar crystal beings, made soft musical sounds that might have been prayers or death songs. Taman used the time to review his mental notes one final time. Zone 1 was the acid marshlands, carnivorous plants, toxic water, and amphibious predators that could spit caustic chemicals with deadly accuracy. Most competitors would try to run through as quickly as possible, but Taman planned to move slowly and observe everything before taking a single step. The ship landed with a heavy thud on a metal platform at the edge of the trial zone. Through the speakers, a mechanical voice began reciting the rules that every competitor had memorized. No weapons or tools from outside the zones. No communication with anyone beyond the planet's surface. No assistance of any kind once the trial began. Survive all 7 zones to complete the trial. Simple rules for an impossible challenge. The cargo bay doors opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The air that flowed in smelled of decay, chemicals, and something else that Taman's brain identified as the scent of death. He shouldered. His small pack, containing only basic survival supplies and recording equipment, then joined the line of competitors heading toward the starting area. The entrance to Zone 1 was marked by a massive archway made of the same twisted metal that covered much of the planet's surface. Beyond it, Taman could see the edge of the marshlands, dark water reflecting the gray sky and strange plants that moved even though there was no wind. The sight was both terrifying and fascinating. A holographic display appeared above the archway, showing the faces and names of all 47 competitors. Warlord Krex stood like a metal mountain, his red eyes focused on the zone ahead. Huntmaster Graal's 6 arms moved in complex patterns as he performed some kind of Relkani ritual. Ambassador Veltaran's crystal body flickered with lights that Taman now recognized as excitement mixed with bloodlust. "Competitors, prepare for Zone 1 entry," the mechanical voice announced. "Trial begins in 60 seconds. Taman closed his eyes and took 3 deep breaths, just as Dr. Yona had taught him during his early training. He visualized the marshland layout he had memorized from the previous trial footage. The toxic pools, the areas where carnivorous plants clustered most densely, the paths that seemed to offer the safest passage. Most importantly, he reminded himself that his goal was not to fight or conquer, but to observe and understand. Trial begins now. The archway's energy barrier disappeared and 47 beings rushed forward into Zone 1. Most of the competitors immediately spread out and began moving at high speed toward the far end of the marshlands. Krex charged. Through the shallow water like an unstoppable force, his massive legs creating waves that splashed against the banks. Graal moved with fluid grace, his Relkani training allowing him to step lightly on floating debris and plant matter. Taman did the exact opposite. He took 5 steps into the zone and then stopped completely. While the other competitors disappeared into the marshlands, Taman crouched at the edge of the first toxic pool and simply watched. The water had a greenish tint and bubbled occasionally, as if something was moving beneath the surface. Strange plants lined the banks, their leaves following the movements of anything that came near them. After 10 minutes of observation, Taman noticed his first pattern. The bubbling in the water was not random. It happened in a specific sequence. 3 quick bubbles near the center of the pool, then a pause, then a single large bubble near the edge. This pattern repeated every 90 seconds like clockwork. He pulled out his recording device and began documenting everything he saw. The plant movements were not aggressive hunting behavior as they appeared, but actually a response to chemical signals in the air. When the water bubbled, it released gases that the plants detected and tracked. The plants were not trying to catch prey. They were monitoring their environment. A scream echoed across the marshlands from somewhere ahead. The holographic display updated to show that competitor number 12, a Zephyrian warrior, had been eliminated. Taman did not look up from his observations. He had expected the first casualties to occur within the first hour. The competitors, who rushed in without understanding the environment, were always the first to die. By the end of his first hour in Zone 1, Taman had identified several crucial patterns. The carnivorous plants only attacked when triggered by specific chemical signatures, the scent of fear, stress hormones, and aggressive pheromones. The toxic pools were connected by underground currents that followed predictable flow patterns. Most importantly, he had spotted movement in the deeper areas that suggested the presence of native prey species. If other creatures lived in this environment, there had to be safe paths and feeding areas that the predators avoided or only visited. At certain times, Taman began moving deeper into the marshlands, but instead of heading directly toward the exit like the other competitors, he followed the subtle trails left by the native prey animals. The path he chose wound between the most dangerous areas, in a way that seemed inefficient, but it kept him away from the main hunting grounds of the larger predators. When acid-spitting amphibians emerged from the water near him, Taman remained completely still until they passed. His research had shown that most predators ignored prey that did not trigger their attack responses. By the second hour, the holographic display showed that only 31 competitors remained. Taman could hear sounds of combat from various directions, roars, explosions, and the distinctive crackling sound that Vextar crystal beings made when they were injured. The warriors were fighting the environment instead of working with it. Taman reached an area where the marshland opened into a wider space filled with floating islands of vegetation. This was where many previous competitors had been killed by flying predators that nested in the plant masses above. Instead of trying to cross quickly, Taman settled down to observe the aerial ecosystem. The flying creatures were not randomly aggressive. They hunted in shifts, with different species active at different times. The large bat-like predators dominated during the early morning hours, but they were being replaced by smaller, faster creatures as the day progressed. More importantly, Taman noticed that the aerial predators avoided certain areas where specific plants grew. He studied the plants until he identified the ones that seemed to provide protection. They had thick, waxy leaves that reflected light in unusual patterns and emitted a faint chemical smell. When he broke off a piece of one plant and held it above his head, the flying predators changed course to avoid him. Using this discovery, Taman collected enough of the protective plants to create a crude shield and began crossing the open area. The flying predators circled overhead but did not attack. Other competitors who tried to cross the same area were immediately swarmed and eliminated. The holographic display continued its grim countdown. 26 competitors, 22, 19. Each elimination represented years of training and genetic enhancement reduced to nothing by the unforgiving environment of Kael'ros Prime. As Taman neared the end of Zone 1, he encountered the area's most dangerous predator, a massive amphibious creature that previous footage showed could dissolve metal with its acidic saliva. The beast was the size of a transport ship and had been responsible for more competitor deaths than any other single predator in Zone 1. Instead of trying to fight or outrun the creature, Taman observed its behavior from a safe distance. The massive predator was not actively hunting. It was territorial, defending a specific area that contained something important to its survival. By studying the creature's movement patterns, Taman identified the edges of its territory and found a path that skirted around the defended zone entirely. When he finally reached the exit from Zone 1, Taman was amazed to discover that he was not the last competitor to arrive. Several warriors who had charged ahead early in the trial had been eliminated, while others who had survived were now struggling to reach the exit. His methodical approach had actually been faster than the traditional aggressive tactics. The transition area between zones was a simple metal chamber where competitors could rest and prepare for the next challenge. As Taman entered, he saw that only 15 competitors had survived Zone 1, Warlord Krex was there, his metal skin showing several acid burns, but his red eyes still glowing with determination. Huntmaster Grawl had lost one of his 6 arms, but otherwise appeared uninjured. Ambassador Veltarin's crystal body was cracked in several places, leaking a luminous fluid that Taman knew was the Vextar equivalent of blood. The crystal caverns of Zone 2 sparkled like the inside of a giant geode as Taman stepped carefully across the uneven floor. Every surface was covered in crystalline formations that caught and reflected light in ways that made the tunnels seem to glow from within. The beauty was mesmerizing, but Taman knew that beauty in the Predator trial usually meant death was very close. Only 8 competitors had survived the transition from Zone 2 to Zone 3. The crystal spiders that hunted by vibration had eliminated 7 more warriors in ways that were both quick and terrible. Taman had watched Huntmaster Growl fall when the Relkani's superior hearing actually worked against him. The spiders used acoustic mimicry to lure their prey into traps by imitating the sounds of safety. Zone 3 stretched out before the remaining competitors like a vision from hell. Thermal vents rose from the ground in irregular clusters, spewing superheated gas and steam that glowed orange and red in the dim light. The air shimmered with heat waves and smelled of sulfur and burning metal. Strange worm-like creatures the size of transport ships moved through the rocky landscape, their segmented bodies glowing with internal heat. Taman pulled out his environmental scanner and checked the temperature readings. The ambient air was already hot enough to cause burns, and near the thermal vents the temperatures reached levels that would melt most metals. The heat-seeking worms were attracted to any source of warmth above the background temperature, which meant that any living creature in this zone was automatically prey. Ambassador Veltarin's crystal body no longer flickered with its earlier arrogance. The Vextar's experiences in the first 2 zones had taught him to respect the human's unconventional approach. "Human Taman," he said through his translator, "I observe that you study each environment before moving. What patterns do you perceive? In this thermal wasteland?" Taman pointed to areas where the steam and gas moved in specific directions. "Air currents. The heat creates predictable convection patterns. Also, notice how the thermal worms move. They're not randomly searching for prey. They're following specific routes between the thermal vents." Warlord Krex, now one of only 3 surviving Gorvak representatives, studied the landscape with new eyes. His warrior training told him to charge straight through and rely on his species' natural resistance to heat. But watching Taman's success in the previous zones had made him reconsider his assumptions about strength and tactics. "If the worms follow specific routes," Krex said slowly, "then there must be areas they avoid. But how do we identify those areas without getting close enough to become prey ourselves?" "By understanding why they choose the routes they do," Taman replied. He activated his scanner and began taking readings from different parts of the zone. Every creature's behavior is based on optimizing something: energy, safety, reproduction. The thermal worms are probably following the paths that give them the most heat energy with the least effort. The remaining competitors spread out across the starting area of Zone 3, each following their own survival strategy. 2 Karathi fighters decided to attempt a high-speed run straight through the center of the zone. Taman watched them disappear into the shimmering heat haze and noted the time. If his calculations were correct, they would encounter the largest thermal worms within 15 minutes. Instead of rushing forward, Taman spent an hour at the edge of Zone 3 simply observing and recording. The thermal worms emerged from underground tunnels near the vents, absorbed heat for a specific amount of time, then disappeared back underground. Their movements followed a precise schedule based on the thermal cycles of the vents themselves. More importantly, Taman noticed that certain areas between the vents remained consistently cooler than others. These areas had different mineral compositions in the ground, metals and crystals that conducted heat away rather than absorbing it. The thermal worms avoided these areas because they provided no energy benefit. A distant scream confirmed that. The 2 Karathi fighters had encountered the thermal worms. The holographic display updated to show that only 6 competitors remained. Taman felt a moment of sadness for the fallen warriors, but he could not let emotion distract him from his analysis. "Human," called a voice from behind him. Taman turned to see one of the surviving competitors approaching, a being he had not spoken with before. This was a Nexari, a species known for their technological integration with their own biology. Half of the creature's body was organic tissue, while the other half was advanced machinery. "I am Engineer Warrior Zextai," the being said. "My integrated sensors have been monitoring your analysis of this environment. Your conclusions match my own technical readings, but you arrived at them using only basic equipment and biological observation. How is this possible?" Taman was surprised by the question. Throughout the trial, he had been so focused on his own survival that he had not realized other competitors were studying his methods. "Pattern recognition is one of humanity's strongest traits. We evolved as persistence hunters who tracked prey across vast distances by reading subtle environmental clues." "Fascinating," Zextai replied. "My species approaches problems through technological enhancement and computational analysis. Yet your biological pattern recognition appears to be equally effective. Perhaps we could share observations to increase both our chances of survival." The suggestion made sense from a purely logical standpoint, but Taman hesitated. The Predator trial was ultimately a competition with only one possible winner. Helping another competitor survive could be helping someone who might eliminate him in later zones. On the other hand, his goal was not just personal survival. It was proving that understanding and cooperation could succeed where aggression and competition had failed. If he could demonstrate that collaborative analysis worked better than individual combat, it would support his entire philosophical approach to the trial. "What do your sensors tell you about the underground tunnel system?" Taman asked. Zextai's mechanical components hummed softly as he processed data. "The tunnels form a complex network extending far beyond this zone. The thermal worms use them to move between different venting areas across multiple zones of the trial. But I also detect passages that the worms do not use, tunnels with different atmospheric compositions and temperature ranges." "Abandoned tunnels?" "No, tunnels designed for different purposes. My analysis suggests this entire thermal system is not natural. It was artificially created and is maintained by technology far beyond current Federation capabilities." This revelation changed everything about how Taman understood Zone 3. If the thermal system was artificial, then it was not a natural ecosystem, but an engineered environment with specific design parameters. The thermal worms were not evolved predators, but created beings serving a particular function within the system. "If you're right," Taman said, "then there should be maintenance access routes and safety systems built into the design. No engineer would create a system this complex without ways to service and control it." Working together, Taman and Zextai began mapping the thermal zone with new understanding. The seemingly random placement of thermal vents actually followed logical engineering principles. The worm patrol routes were designed to provide comprehensive coverage while minimizing energy waste. Most importantly, they identified several areas that appeared to be service corridors designed for non-thermal-based maintenance. As they moved deeper into Zone 3, following one of the maintenance routes they had identified, Taman realized that his partnership with Zextai represented something unprecedented in the trial's history. Instead of competing against each other, they were combining their different approaches to understand the environment more completely than either could manage alone. The maintenance route led them through areas of Zone 3 that no previous competitor had ever seen. Instead of the hellish landscape of thermal vents and predatory worms, they found tunnels with breathable atmosphere and stable temperatures. Ancient machinery lined the walls, still functioning after thousands of years. Holographic displays showed status information in languages that neither Taman nor Zextai could read, but the technical diagrams were universal enough to understand. "This is remarkable," Zextai said as they passed through a chamber filled with massive thermal regulation equipment. "The entire zone is a single engineered system. The thermal vents, the worms, even the mineral compositions of the ground. Everything was designed by an advanced civilization." "But designed for what purpose?" Taman wondered aloud. Their answer came when they reached the end of the maintenance tunnel and emerged into the transition area leading to Zone 4. The chamber they entered was clearly not built by the same civilization that had created the Federation's trial zones. The architecture was different, more organic in its flowing curves and integration with natural materials. Holographic displays activated as they entered, showing images of the creatures they had encountered in the previous zones. But instead of presenting them as dangerous predators, the displays showed them as part of complex ecological systems. The acid-spitting amphibians from Zone 1 were shown caring for their young and maintaining the chemical balance of their environment. The crystal spiders from Zone 2 were depicted as architects. The entrance to Zone 7 stood before Taman like a doorway made of pure light. He had never imagined he would make it this far. Behind him lay 6 zones of challenges that had eliminated 45 of the galaxy's finest warriors. Only he and Zextai remained, and even the Nexari engineer warrior had been forced to remain behind in Zone 6 when his technological components began malfunctioning in the psionic fields. Taman was alone for the final challenge, but he no longer felt the fear that had accompanied him in the earlier zones. Each trial had taught him something new about letting go of assumptions and opening his mind to possibilities that seemed impossible. The ancient civilization that had created this test had been patient teachers, and he had been a dedicated student. Zone 7 was unlike anything he had encountered before. As he stepped through the light barrier, he found himself in a space that seemed to exist outside normal reality. The ground beneath his feet was solid, but it appeared to be made of crystallized starlight. The walls stretched infinitely upward and seemed to be constructed from solidified music. He could hear harmonies that had no source and see colors that had no names. In the center of this impossible space sat 7 figures arranged in a perfect circle. As Taman approached, he realized these were not creatures like the predators from the previous zones. These beings were made of pure thought and energy, their forms shifting and changing like living equations. They were beautiful and terrible, at the same time representing intelligence so advanced that it barely registered as life. "Welcome, young seeker," one of the figures spoke directly into Taman's mind without using words. "We are the Kethmori, the creators of this trial that has tested your species and 46 others across 2,000 years of your time." Taman felt overwhelmed by the presence of such ancient intelligence, but he forced himself to remain calm and observant. Everything in the previous zones had taught him that his first assumptions were usually wrong. These beings might appear godlike, but they were still following patterns that could be understood. "You are the first to reach this place with true understanding," another Kethmori continued. "Others have arrived here through strength, cunning, or technology, but you came through wisdom. You learned to see our lessons rather than simply surviving our challenges." "What lessons?" Taman asked aloud, his voice sounding small in the vast space. The Kethmori began to show him images that formed in the air around their circle. He saw their civilization at its height, a species that had mastered every form of science and technology imaginable. They had conquered diseases, controlled the forces of nature, and spread across thousands of star systems. They had become the ultimate predators in every sense of the word. "We achieved everything your species dreams of achieving," the first Kethmori explained. "We eliminated all threats to our survival. We removed all challenges to our expansion. We became so efficient at controlling our environment that we forgot how to exist within it." The images showed what happened next. As the Kethmori gained absolute control over their surroundings, they began to lose something essential. Their creativity diminished because they no longer needed to solve problems. Their empathy disappeared because they no longer faced real challenges. Most critically, they stopped learning because they believed they already knew everything worth knowing. "Our civilization died not from external threats, but from internal stagnation," another Kethmori said. "We became so successful at being predators that we forgot how to be part of the greater web of existence. When we finally realized our mistake, it was too late to save ourselves. But not too late to teach others," Taman realized. "Exactly. We created this trial as our final gift to the galaxy, not to find the strongest warriors or the most advanced technologies, but to identify species capable of learning the lesson. We learned too late." The Kethmori showed him more images. Every species that had attempted the trial over the past 2,000 years. Warriors who tried to fight their way through each zone. Scientists who tried to analyze and control each environment. Diplomats who tried to negotiate with creatures that could not be reasoned with. All of them had missed the fundamental point. "The trial was never about defeating predators," Taman said, understanding flooding through him. "It was about learning to exist in harmony with complex systems. About understanding that true strength comes from adaptation and cooperation, not domination and control. Yes, the Kethmori replied in unison. And you demonstrated this understanding not just through your individual actions, but through your willingness to collaborate with Zextai. You showed that different approaches can work together to achieve greater understanding than either could manage alone. But I didn't complete the trial alone. Zextai helped me understand Zone 3. Doesn't that mean I failed your test? The ancient beings shifted their forms in what Taman somehow understood was laughter. Child, the fact that you sought collaboration instead of trying to eliminate a potential rival is exactly why you succeeded. Your species' greatest strength is not your individual capabilities, but your ability to work together and learn from others. The Kethmori began to fade, their forms becoming more translucent as their message neared completion. We have one final gift for you and your species. The knowledge we have gained over millions of years will be transmitted to your Federation. Not our technologies or our weapons, but our understanding of how to maintain balance between growth and wisdom. What about the other zones, the predators and the challenges? They will remain as a reminder and a teaching tool. Other species will continue to attempt the trial, but now they will know its true purpose. The predators you encountered are not enemies to be defeated. They are teachers offering lessons about adaptation, cooperation, and the interconnectedness of all life. As the Kethmori completed their transformation into pure energy, Taman felt a vast data stream entering his mind. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming. Millions of years of accumulated wisdom about biological systems, ecological balance, and the delicate relationships that allowed complex civilizations to survive and thrive. When the transfer was complete, Taman found himself standing in a simple metal chamber that he recognized as the trial's end point. Through a window, he could see the orbital station where his journey had begun. The holographic display showed his completion time and survival status, but more importantly, it showed a new designation he had never seen before. Trial completed with understanding. The door opened and Park Minji rushed in, followed by Commander Dowan and Dr. Yeona. Their faces showed a mixture of relief, amazement, and something approaching awe. Behind them came representatives from dozens of Federation species, all wanting to understand how a human had accomplished what their greatest warriors could not. Taman, Minji said, her voice breaking with emotion, the entire galaxy watched your progress through the trial. Your approach has changed everything about how we understand strength, survival, and our place in the universe. Dr. Yona embraced her former student with tears in her eyes. You did it, my dear boy. You proved that wisdom is more powerful than weapons, and understanding is more valuable than conquest. Commander Dowan, his military bearing unchanged, but his expression softer than Taman had ever seen it, stepped forward and offered a formal salute. Son, you've not only brought honor to humanity, you've given the entire galaxy a new way of thinking about conflict and cooperation. As news of Taman's success spread throughout the Federation, the reactions were as varied as the species themselves. Some warrior cultures initially refused to accept that their traditional approaches had been fundamentally flawed. Others embraced the new understanding immediately and began incorporating Taman's observational methods into their own training programs. The Vextar Collective, represented by the now-recovered Ambassador Vel Taran, issued a formal statement, acknowledging that their species' arrogance had blinded them to deeper truths. The Relkani hunters established new training programs focused on understanding ecosystems rather than simply tracking prey. Even the Gorvak Empire, through Warlord Krex, announced that they would begin teaching their warriors about cooperation and adaptation alongside traditional combat skills. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. No longer were humans seen as the newest and least experienced Federation members. They were now recognized as bringing a unique perspective that older species had lost over millennia of technological advancement and military focus. Taman spent the following months traveling between Federation worlds, sharing the knowledge he had gained from the Kethmori and helping establish new research programs focused on ecological wisdom and collaborative problem-solving. The data the ancient beings had transmitted to him proved invaluable in addressing challenges that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. Environmental restoration projects that had failed for decades suddenly succeeded when approached with understanding, rather than force. Conflicts between species were resolved through careful analysis of underlying needs rather than military intervention. Most importantly, TE